Welcome to another episode of the How Men Cry podcast. I'm your host, Dxtr Spits. The How Men Cry movement and mission is aimed at making compassion contagious by changing the narrative around men's mental health and vulnerability, where we capture stories from men in the community to just talk about their life experience, what's been going on with them, and how their mental space is. I'm very honored today to flip the script and the table because about a week ago or so today, I would have been in the interviewee chair. So now I get to welcome Brandon Pope to come be interviewed, man. How's it feel to be on the other side?
It's weird, man. It's weird. I'm not used to being interviewed, so I'm always telling interviewees when I'm interviewing them, like, "Oh, don't be nervous. Call it's all chill." And then for me now, I'm like, "Oh man, now I'm nervous." So,
Yeah,
happy
it's
to
so
be here, man. Thank you for sharing your platform with me.
Oh, for sure. And thank you for participating. And it is kind of interesting how that flips because I don't think I've ever gotten nervous interviewing anybody. Actually, when I really think about it, but on the flip side, where it's like, oh, I got to talk about what's going on. So appreciate that little bit of vulnerability already. Um,
Absolutely, man. That's what it's all about.
yeah. So, just to kind of jump right in, man, could you tell the listeners at home just a bit about, who you are? And you can answer that however you want to. That can be career or personal, but who is Brandon Pope?
Yeah, I think when you ask that question, right? I think the first thing that I think to go to is career, right?
Yeah.
Which and I think that's for a lot of people, right? And I think that kind of is a problem in our society that we attach so much of who we are to what we do for
Yeah.
a living. So obviously, I'm a TV reporter and anchor. I'm a journalist. I'm a film critic and movie reviewer and TV reviewer, a podcaster like you, and a columnist and things like that. But what I am intrinsically and who I actually am, is I'm a nerd. I'm a hip hop head. I'm a guy who uh, enjoys a good laugh. I enjoy a good whiskey cocktail. Um, you know, I, I'm a person who is an uncle. I'm a
Yeah.
son. I'm a brother. Um, and I'm a black man in America, and that's intrinsically who I am, right? So I think it's interesting how we always we attach career. So I appreciate you, asking like the way you asked it, like you
Yeah.
say who you are, whether it's career or not. It's like wow, yeah, I didn't even think of the outside from career, so that's important.
Yeah, and no, I appreciate you answering that way, and that's exactly, that's the motivation because I realize like just in my own journey, that being something that seemed so important, like I identified so hard with what it was that I did, that to me it seemed it can be a shield sometimes for really like getting down because you can check all these boxes of, well, I'm this, I've achieved this success, that success, but at this point I've met enough people in life where I'm like, you can still be an asshole even if you got a bunch of a bunch of check marks. So it's like, so I like to just have and even if you are an asshole, like let's talk about that too. Like it's just
Right.
I would just rather get to that info,
Yeah.
than to like
The journalism industry, one of the most toxic things, I guess, about the industry is that you talk about attaching yourself to what you do. That's literally what journalists do. Like journalists are so entrenched in
mm,
journalism being their identity,
mm,
and I think that what happens for a lot of people when they come to a moment in their life, this industry doesn't pay a lot of money. Not
mm,
everybody's able to make big dollars doing it, and so you come to a point where some think, okay, I got to get out of the industry, but they're so in their head, like, but I'm a journalist. That's what
mm,
I am. That it's tough for them to cross that hurdle of like, but I'm not making enough money to support my life.
yeah,
So I think everyone needs to like kind of unpack that for themselves. Like, who are you actually? You're more than what your job is and what you're paid to do. It's good to
yeah,
be passionate about what you do, no doubt, and it's good to love what you do and make that a part of you. Um, but it is not who you are. We're humans,
yeah,
who have lives outside of that 9 to 5 that we clock into, you know?
So how has that impact, like that fact exactly of your, identity, even as like a journalist, like how did you find that as being your passion? Like I think a similarity that we both have is in a way we're kind of storytellers,
Mhm.
through different platforms. And I've recently, realized and kind of taken more ownership of like that really is what I'm passionate about. So like, did you always know that you wanted to go into journalism? Was it something that you found in college? Like what was that pathway like for you?
Yeah, man. I think storytelling overall is something I fell into. I didn't know what the name of it was.
Hmm.
But it's something that I was doing, and then I got to a point where someone put a label on it and said, "Oh, you're doing journalism, you're doing storytelling." And it's like, "Oh." So like I started out. I wish I had one of those stories where, oh, I was 3 years old and I always knew I wanted to be a reporter, but that's not what happened at all. When I was three, I wanted to be a Power Ranger. When, like when I was five, I wanted to be an artist, like a painter or a
Yeah.
sketcher, someone that does comic books, things like that. Um, but I had this class in high school. It's a radio TV class.
Mm.
And we did like morning announcements in high school, listing off what's for lunch, but also like we got a chance to expand it out and do like actual little stories. We didn't call them stories, we just called them projects. But
Yeah.
I would do little things and talk to my classmates and I put together little pieces. And then on the side, I'd, get some friends together, make some music videos for songs that were popular at the time and put our own spin on them. And, and then I had a friend, I started doing mixed martial arts in high school. I had a friend who was really brave. He's got cerebral palsy and
Mm.
he was a fighter. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. We got to share this with somebody. So I did a documentary on him.
Wow.
And as I did all these things, start racking up these things, I started thinking about college. And the college counselor's like, oh, yeah, so we're going to put you in some journalism classes. I'm like, journalism? It's not, it's not what I'm doing. She's like, oh, yeah, for sure it is. She's like, you put together people's stories, right? You tell stories, right? I'm like, I guess, yeah.
You're like, yeah, it's funny how when people point something that from the outside in might seem so seemingly obvious, but to you, you're like, is that what I'm doing?
Right. That's what it was. I'm like, I had never put a label on it, right? So now
Yeah.
that the label's on it, then that becomes kind of your identity in a sense. But
Yeah.
it's been quite a journey, man. And being a black man doing it is a challenge in its own right. Because
Yeah.
with journalism comes a very large responsibility, especially when you're black. But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
responsibility overall for journalism is for the public and for to inform people and to tell stories responsibly. And this industry has done a lot of harm to our people.
Yeah.
Um, and so when you're a black person doing it, you have this internal struggle of like, okay, I want to do the best thing for my people and, you know, tell stories about them in a responsible way. But you also have this pressure that you feel like you need to overcorrect for the entire industry, that your actions alone are going to
Hmm.
work to bend that whole thing and change history, and that's not the case. So that
Mm.
mental struggle and hurdle and balancing all of that, it can be tough. But it's I'm proud to be black and I'm proud to be a black journalist. It's something I wouldn't trade for the world.
Yeah. Could you talk more about that pressure in general? Because I know for me, I battle with that sometimes where I think, being whether it's like performer, business owner, other things like that, uh, that you get into. I say it in one of the most recent poems I had, which was like, oh, black man with the skill set, be this pillar for your, community, or be this and that. And I think in some ways, I've definitely felt pressures, in terms of like who I need to be or how I need to show up, or am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? Is it too? So I'm curious because I could totally understand, especially from media. Like it's a little easier to have control over like what I'm writing and something like that. But I'm just curious about, I guess, that pressure for you because you're telling stories through these other, outlets and things. So could you just talk more about what that experience is like?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, part of it is I think I take great pride in the fact that one, representation does matter, right? So
Yeah.
there are people that see me on TV. There's kids that see me on TV and say, "Yo, I could do that too," and that empowers them, right? Um, but you also have this thing where people are going to attach certain things to you just because of the color of your skin and what you do.
Yeah.
Um, and you have bosses you have to report to. You have ethics you have to abide by.
Yeah.
Um, and so when you're a black person doing this job, sometimes you run into situations where people want you to be everything for everybody, and you just
Hmm.
can't possibly do it, right? My
Hmm.
first job out of college, when I was actually doing like news reporting, was in South Bend, Indiana, not far from here in Chicago.
Yeah. Yep.
A
Familiar.
place that has a very great black community, very passionate, and they embrace their black people that are on TV. They
Yeah.
love us, right? They invite you over for Christmas and all kinds of stuff. But you also have some people who think because you are the black TV person, you need to be doing every single story involving a black person,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just not possible. So
Hmm.
I had some people that weren't happy with me about that, who were like,
Yeah.
and it's like, bro, it's a weekend. You're calling me at 6 o'clock in the morning,
He said,
talking about, hey, I,
I
I
got
got
like
this
I got like a
story for
15
you.
minute slot here, y'all. I'm trying to.
I'm just waking up. You talking about, oh, I got a story for you. Come over here and like, nah, can I get a break, right? Um,
Yeah.
or even what I hated, was where people had they come to me with these story ideas that just weren't stories. Like maybe there's stories to them, but they weren't stories that I can go to my boss with and say, let's do this. Best
Yeah.
example, there was an older black woman, lover. She was amazing. But she came up to me, she said, Brandon, I need you to do an investigation. I'm like, oh, okay, investigation. On what? She said, okay, so the laundromat over here took my quarter. I'm like, okay. She's like, took my quarter. So it's like, should I call the management? And they didn't get back to me. So I'll use a different machine. But that took my quarter too. So I'm out 50 cents now. And she's like, I need you
I'm
to launch an
sorry.
investigation.
I'm sorry. I don't want to laugh at somebody's. I'm not
Me
trying to.
neither. And in that moment, she wanted me to like literally go to my boss and say, "Okay, this woman lost her 2 quarters. Let's investigate this laundromat." And that's just, you know. So
Yeah.
what I told her, I was like, "Listen, I'm happy to put in a call for you, or go to the laundromat myself. But as far as a story on our news station about it, I don't know if I can get that to happen.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to help you and assist you in trying to do
And
that." And she was so disappointed. Um,
I mean, you better than me. I probably wouldn't have been making no extra call than that. Well, I don't know. It depends because I have a soft spot for like elders sometimes. So if she's like, "Baby,
she's a
they took my 50 cents,"
she's
I'm
an
like,
elder.
"Well, yeah, it
You
makes
know
you
what
a
I
little."
ended up doing? I ended up grabbing 2 quarters from my house and saying, "Okay, they gave me the quarters back." I just gave them to her
Smart.
because
Yeah.
and she was so happy about that. But I also knew, like, she went to the same church that I frequented,
Hmm.
so I knew she was going to be on me about it.
Yeah.
So, but
You
that's
know,
it.
hey,
You got to be everything for everybody. You get that pressure as a black journalist,
yeah.
and that is very difficult. And then you got that you're dealing with on top of just being black in a white industry,
Yeah.
the microaggressions you're dealing with, the
Yeah.
gaslighting you deal with,
Yeah.
um, having to
Especially over
argue.
the news. I
Yeah,
just imagine, I'm like, so much of that stuff is all the nature is controversial in so many cases. So I just sorry to
and you'll hear some
um,
people that you work for or work with say some really messed up stuff.
yeah.
And you have to argue with them as to why what they're doing or what they're saying is messed up. They'll
Yeah.
dismiss black stories altogether,
Yeah.
and you have to be the person who has to be you try not you don't want to be the angry black person, right? But
Yeah.
you have these moments where you have to be, and you have to show passion and say, hey, this story on Black Lives Matter. This is important to tell. This story, this matters to people. We have to do something on it. And there's black people in every newsroom across the country that have to do that.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting because people are looking at them like, oh wow, they're combative. Oh wow, they're not easy to work with. And that, having to always fight to get people to see the humanity in your community,
Hmm.
it's not easy. I'm not saying all stations are like this, but it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
prevalent problem for sure. So
So that brings me to a question or just a line of thinking of like, so more so from your own personal mental health standpoint. So even if you just isolate away from career, just for you personally, when dealing with pressure, stresses, other things like that, how are you balancing your mental health space? How do you what's that process look like for you?
yeah, it's an ever changing process. Um, I think early on I wasn't really aware or as heightened to mental health.
Mm,
So early on in my career, I really wasn't doing nothing. I was
yeah,
just packing stuff in and pushing forward.
yeah,
Now, you know, one thing I do is, I talk to people. Like I got a network of brothers and friends that I can just lean on and say, "Hey, this really fucked me up today. This really, I'm sorry, this cuss, my bad.
oh
This
no,
really,
I was cursing earlier. Say whatever you want. Okay.
okay, cool."
Sorry, sorry, listeners, but I don't. So I free space, man.
Yeah, yeah. This really messed me up, right? Or like this is really going on in my life right now. So I got that. That's really helpful, right? But I've also tapped into the power of seeing people, whether
Mhm.
it's mental health professionals, doing activities that help you process things. There's a great group out here called Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health.
Yeah, I've worked with them a bit. Yeah,
Yeah, going to their sessions helps me out a lot. Just
yeah,
being around people and being in an open, safe space and going through different strategies. And then one thing I always try to practice is gratitude. I try to find something in my day, no matter what, that I can at least point to as like, this is a positive, this is a great thing. Um, and then I find escapes in a sense, things that kind
yeah,
of help clear the head. So whether that be video games, I'll play Madden or
yeah,
NBA 2K. That's an easy escape. Or listening to some good music and uh, scrolling through Reddit, reading a good book. Like there's
yeah,
lots of good ways that I like to escape and kind of uh, you know clear my head a little bit. And I'll
yeah,
exercise.
yeah,
When it's nice out, I love to go for a run. I live close to the lake, so being able to just go to the lake
yeah,
and see the beauty there. Um, the gym, obviously, but being able to go for a quick run or do something that's active, play basketball with some friends, that is a really good way that I
yeah,
clear my head. You really, if you focused on your basketball game and your screen game and trying to follow somebody and everything, you you're pretty good to go in terms of not having to worry about anything else.
yeah. No, I love it. And honest, and that, so it makes me wonder too. Did you growing up? Did you have, and because I know you were saying like before, maybe you didn't focus or consider the mental health thing. I can super resonate with that first and foremost because it just wasn't even.
Yeah,
I kind of had some tools here and there, but it wasn't so deliberate, where it was just like, I think a little more foggy. And we talked about it at the shoot of just like, I didn't necessarily grow up having a lot of those conversations, could you talk maybe more a bit? I could say it's a two-part question about one, mental health discussions growing up, and then secondly, just like being a man narratives that you came in contact with growing up.
well, this is something not a lot of people know about me, so already you're getting some nuggets here, but um,
Juicy.
juicy stuff. Early in my life, so my mom has bipolar disorder,
Mm,
um, and she, when she was diagnosed with it, um, I think the reaction from her was more shame
mm,
And I, so she kind of operated in a sense of like, this isn't something that people need to know. This isn't something that needs to be talked about. I remember her explicitly saying, when we go to the family reunion, uh, you don't need to bring up that I'm on meds. You don't need to bring up any of that.
Mm,
You
yeah.
know, so right away the tone for me was, it's personal. It's not something you really talk about. It just my grandma was probably a little more progressive on it.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
because she's the one that told my mom, you need to go see some help and you need to go get some therapy. My sister eventually, she's younger,
Hmm.
she went into therapy. She was, acting out in school, and they were having a lot of problems with her, and so my grandma was like, I think she needs to go to therapy too, and so my mom and her would go to therapy together and stuff like that. So
Who is grandma? I'm curious. I'm like, I'm just, I mean, not to
grandma's with her.
overjudge, but that's not at all what my grandparents were like. So I'm just like, what's her? That's a lot of wisdom.
I think part of it is my grandma. So my grandma was in the medical industry. She was a
Mm,
lab technician for what, 50 years,
gotcha.
maybe. Ooh, I think longer than that, probably 60. Um, just retired about 8 years ago. So I feel like being in that space,
Hmm.
she was
Hmm.
always around uh, health professionals and conversations around that. I
Yeah,
don't know if my grandma necessarily ever went to counseling or ever sought therapy herself. Um, but I do know my grandma to be someone who is very open about talking about how she feels. She doesn't bottle
that's
things up.
awesome. That's
Um,
awesome.
like, if there's a power to it, right? Like, she's very
Yeah,
direct and she lets you know how she feels. And she's open about that. So I think that strength from my grandma and seeing her push to get my sister and aunt, get them into therapy, I think about that sometimes, right? The only thing though, and I don't blame my mom for this or anybody, they never asked me if I wanted to see therapy or needed therapy. Um,
interesting.
Now I think there's reasons for this that I completely understand on
Yeah.
surface. I was the older child.
Hmm.
I was the kid who seemed to have everything going right, right? I was student council president, football team captain, good grades, English academic team, I'm the kid they're bragging about. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Brandon, that's our guy. So I think, and my sister on the other hand was getting suspended from school, getting in fights, kicked off a basketball team and cheerleading and all that type of stuff. So I think the focus immediately went to the younger sister,
Makes sense.
and
Yeah.
my mom also having her issues, and there was nothing that I hadn't exhibited any behaviors to say bipolar or ADHD or anything like that. So I get on surface level why that was.
Yeah.
I don't have any malice in that way.
Yeah.
But the conversation about me getting mental health, that was never in my orbit. Grandma never suggested it. It was never even floated that men. So that's the other thing too. So as a
Yeah.
guy, you're hearing, that men shouldn't cry. My grandpa was very old fashioned, from the South, from Alabama. So I remember when I was young, he'd be like, cut that crying out, or I'm gonna give you something to cry about. We've all heard that
That's
before,
the
right?
worst. That's the worst sentence
It's a
probably for
terrible
young
sentence,
men.
man.
Stop. I give you something to cry about. It's like Amari. It's such a strange response when you think about it.
You know what sticks in my head the most about that? When
Mhm.
I turned 13, my grandpa loved this man. What a guy. He said, "All right, you're a man now." He said, "So at 13, you're a man now." So he's like, "So from now on, you act up, you start crying, any of that." He pulled out this big wooden plank that had a rusty nail coming out of it. He said, "You act up, start crying, start making a fuss, whatever. This is going up your ass." I'm like, I'm like, damn. And at that time, my grandpa's a G. So I'm like, he would do that.
You like that? It might.
he,
He
he
might
might
be
do that.
serious about this.
He might be serious.
Oh
So I
gosh.
mean, that impacts the way you process things
Yeah.
too. So all those reinforcements I think kind of go into it. But as you go through life, South Bend was a time where I was seeing things I had never seen in my life.
Mm.
I was seeing um, regularly. I was seeing dead bodies. I was
Yeah.
covering murders. I was covering shootings. I was covering trauma. I
Yeah.
was interviewing grieving mothers who had lost their kids, and you
Mm.
know, and I was just pushing all that aside, right?
Mm.
And then you take that, we don't know where you're taking that, but you take that stuff into relationships. So, I was dating a woman in South Bend, and I would just shut down and not I disappear. I go ghost. And
Mm.
I explained, oh, I just needed some time to step away. But really that was just a trauma response.
Yeah.
When I look back at it, and the way it's been explained to me, that's a trauma response, just shutting down, right?
Hmm.
This idea of being emotionless in a sense. I used to pride myself on that. I'd be like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, I'm a G, bro. I ain't got no emotions." There's a Drake song I think called "Emotionless." I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, man, that's the motto."
It is. I can totally I mean, that's been like I can say the same. I had a pretty similar response. I realize how many things now as I've been unpacking a lot more that people sometimes will take on and like internalize as personality traits when
Mhm.
they're really trauma responses. And I think you're absolutely right about the fact of stuff showing up within a relationship, because the way that you learn to be in relationship, whether close or some of those I think like when I think of a lot of men that I maybe grew up with, it's like if you learned in those relationships that you aren't supposed to talk about what's going on, whatever else, that may be okay in a certain amount of settings, but there are times where it's like, yo, somebody just died, somebody got shot in front, like literally, I one of the poems or pieces I performed, it's like somebody got shot in front of you. That's not like, and I didn't talk at the time. I wasn't in therapy. There wasn't a conversation about it. It was like, oh, I just, deal with and process that in whatever kind of way. It's like these are not equivalent, not to but butt into the story, but I can
Yeah.
really resonate with that. Just like so how did you was there a switch point, where you were like, I have to really challenge and adjust these narratives that I learned? Was it like one big moment, or has it been kind of more gradual for you?
I think it's been gradual, and I think a lot of it's been honestly. I think the job I do is part of the reason uh, that I got more open to it.
Yeah.
From interviewing guys like you, um, who are able to help spread that awareness in a sense. Hearing from people explaining that men crying is okay and stuff. I think early on there was a pastor that I had in South Bend, and he would talk about how he would weep.
Mm.
He was very open about that. He was like, I wept today. I'm like, wait, you know what? Like, that's not normal, right? And in talking to him, he had this thing where he talked about how us as black people, we have so many tears that we just hold back.
Mm.
Tears that are continuing to flow, but they're not flowing outward, they're flowing inward.
Mm.
And how he believes it was like this interview I was doing was like about violence in the community, right? But he was explaining like these tears that we're crying, they're not going out, they're going in. It's overflowing and that's spilling out into the streets. And that's what's happening in the city. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, what a powerful thing. And I talked to him some more about it. We got some lunch and he's like, yeah, man, he talked about the troubles he went through. And that could have been probably the first moment I was like, okay, maybe there's something to maybe not. I wasn't thinking mental health. I was thinking just opening up
Yeah.
and being vulnerable, right? Then the mental health thing, once I got to Chicago, especially, this city is so the challenges the city faces when it comes to the mental health crisis are immense. And I
Yeah.
was covering the shutting down of all these mental health clinics,
Yeah.
and talking to activists and hearing them explain why these health clinics matter, and then making that connection in my head to what's happening in the city, where it's happening in the city, and where these mental health clinics are shutting down. Once you see that, you're like, okay, it's becoming even more clear how mental health, how
Mm,
salient, how important it is to the community. I had a barbershop series where I'm like, let's explore this some more. So I brought a mental health professional. We sat down at the barbershop, and the things like these messages just kept getting reinforced, right?
mm,
People started saying, hey, Brandon Pope, he's very forward about mental health. He does a lot of stories about it. Meanwhile, people assuming that I was getting mental health help and that but the truth is I had not had any.
wow.
And so in a sense, I was a hypocrite. I'm telling
Yeah.
men, oh, it's okay, oh, mental health's important, and I'm not seeking any myself.
Yeah.
Got to a point where I realized, I don't know what that point was, but I was getting bogged down, and I knew that there needed to be someone to help me get things clear in my head, in a sense, a clear
Mm,
direction. And I guess the other thing too is like getting out of my head thinking that something had to be wrong
hmm.
to talk to
Yeah.
a mental health professional. There was no crisis going on, right? I just needed to have that discourse, in a sense. So
Yeah.
that's what started it for me, and it's
Yeah.
been great ever since. And now I'm very open, and I'm continuously working on that, right? Trying to navigate mental health and how
Yeah.
do I best do what's best for the mental, um, and how do I prioritize that, in a world that tells you to keep packing on, keep adding responsibilities, keep working and working and working and not thinking about that stuff. It's like we got to put that first.
Yeah. And that's, that battle, the part of like packing on, I'm still working
Yeah.
on that personally because I know that I have an internal narrative that I battle or fight against of kind of like it's not enough, you're not doing enough, it's not this, it's not that.
Do you feel
Um,
like when you're relaxing that you should be doing something?
oh, a lot of times.
Exactly.
Audrey, who you got to meet with the How Man Cry project. I love the relationships that are beginning to circle me now. She's like, you need to go to the woods. She's like, run along. Like you need to go like chill this out. She's like, there have been things that have been done because those the narrative, but like I guess a couple things like the part of just continuously packing on things. What I've really come to find is like it can be a chase that is it's there's no fulfillment point, and when there's no real fulfillment point, like you talked about gratitude, but I think it's so powerful. I try to do something similar like that where it's like I've had to stop myself to really 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 be grateful for the points that I've gotten to, because if you're not careful, this like try to fulfill goes on, and then like from the standpoint of mental health, like there's never really peace, there's never really like contentment within yourself, because there's this like scarcity of I need to be instead of like abundance. And that may be a projection just from my own personal circumstance, but that's kind of what came to mind, from what you were speaking through. So that's really awesome that found a pathway like that. Do you feel like do you see maybe like men in your life or family or relationships changing at all, or do you maybe view them differently? Like what are those relationships like with the men around you?
Yeah, you can kind of see everybody growing a little bit, right?
Mhm.
A lot of my bestest friends who I came up in the industry with, right? You can even see our language changing around
Mhm.
just emoting, right? Just saying that we care about each other, right?
Yeah.
Um, like I feel like and this probably you probably had this happen too with other men. You can go years knowing a dude and never telling him you love him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what
Be
had
like, hey
happened.
man.
And also too, you have this moment, and this is a part of growing as a person too, where you attach, whether jokingly or not, you attach showing emotion to your bro as signs of being gay or,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
a especially in Black culture.
oh,
I don't want to just demonize us. Maybe I can't speak on other ones, but
it's true. I
it's
mean,
heavy in ours.
we would say, hey, no homo, bro. Like that's a
Yeah,
common expression, right? Or like, hey, not to make it weird. Why we got to add all these caveats, right?
yeah,
And so I've noticed though, one, as we've seen more uh, cultural touch points like George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and stuff like that over time,
hmm
we are seeing ourselves in these, right? And we're seeing our own mortality.
mm,
And I think we're getting a deeper grasp, each one of us, of like who we are, and that time is limited. And so you
yeah,
got to value the relationships you have. And it's
mm,
okay to say you love your brother. It's okay to say it. There's nothing wrong
yeah,
with it. And I've seen that shift, and I've seen that growth too, from instead of automatically being like, oh, that's, I hate the expression, that's gay or whatever.
yeah,
Nah, this is literally just us being us. And part of that too just comes with being a better person overall, and realizing that it's really immature to attach emotions and feelings to sexuality or how you live your life,
hmm
right? And also, what if, who cares if you're gay or not?
yeah. Which is why that's
It's
a whole.
stupid.
I'm still looking at and working on how to address some content in particular around that
Yeah,
conversation.
it's a
And
tricky one because there is an internalized
oh man,
thing
yeah,
within. I don't want to demonize our culture either, but like there is an internalized homophobia, um, that you're
it's
kind of, I hate to say raised with, but you could go through life. You'll have your uncles make comments, grandpas make comments.
yeah.
It's
I've definitely experienced teasing, ridicule, all types of stuff like that. I
mhm,
remember actually one time being just from coming to the defense of a queer person, like
mhm,
in a like not even in a way of like it was like a hypothetical person. There wasn't a person here, like somebody was basically saying, or a hypothetical scenario, and basically I was like, well, that seems kind of short-sighted, and it's like a group of older Black guys, and it's like I'm just saying like that seems kind of short-sighted, or this or that, or like why does this have to be a negative thing, if it's like a queer man on TV or just other things like that. And then because they didn't, I guess, know that much about me, then immediately they're like, well, y'all folks and blah blah blah. Cause then I became the queer man and I'm like, dude, you don't even know. It's just it's amazing how deeply rooted it is. And you're right, like it's just really unfortunate because it it kind of overall just negatively how do I want to word it? It it really just walks us away from important conversations, which is just like seeing yourself as a being that feels and experiences things, and then also understanding that there are other people, regardless of whatever factor it is, that see and experiencing things. Like it takes you so far from that because it's just like, so I don't know. That's soapbox rant. Thanks for coming to my TED talk, y'all. It probably didn't make any
I'm with you,
sense,
man. Yeah.
but it's just, yeah, that one's crazy. I resonate with that a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
man. I mean, I feel like we as men, just from like school culture in elementary, middle, and high school, right? We say all these things and we internalize those things, and I think it all factors into that mental health conversation,
oh
and
yeah,
that being vulnerable, being emotional, the automatic, linking together of showing emotions with that being your sexuality, like that just makes no sense at all. But we did that. We
yeah,
actively did that in high school, and it's unfortunate that it happened. I've had to apologize to people,
yeah,
um,
for
in
sure.
high
Yeah,
school. I mean, I've changed as a person. I used to make a lot of passe, homophobic comments, just to be honest,
yeah,
that we just thought were cool.
yeah,
And I had a football teammate who is gay,
yeah,
and at the time he didn't come out, but we let him know how we felt about it, and it wasn't right
yeah,
the way we did it. So I think us, and we didn't come from a hateful place. We just came from honestly what we were kind of raised into. It sounds
Hmm.
terrible. So you're
Yeah.
right. It's a big conversation that there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you opening up about that, honestly, because it's kind of one of those things, and it's this whole conversation has just been nice from the standpoint of I think you mentioned kind of being in these like internal battles, like whether that being within your career or other thing. I often feel that way around many of these narratives. And to be quite honest, like sometimes as a like black man, even trying to interact with other men in community, like, within my own community is difficult sometimes because it's like those narratives, like I think you asked me a question within the interview, like maybe around do I think the narratives are changing? And I was like, well, I've changed a lot of my circle and my groups, and I got fooled a couple of times into feeling like,
Mm.
yeah, man, everybody is talking more openly and this and that. And then I did some traveling and I hung out in some other areas, and I'm like, oh no. I'm like you've created this for yourself. It's some things that still need to be talked about here. So
Yeah, you got to
um
step outside the circle sometimes, and
yeah, because I was like,
yeah.
oh, that ain't true. Like, but so could I kind of circle back? I got just a couple more questions for you. So when we talk about like crying out, we don't necessarily talk about it being physical tears. It's just the many means that we may cry out. And you talked about different positive healthy ways in terms of like outlets like games, working out, just different means that you found. Have Would you be comfortable either sharing a story of a time that you did cry or maybe had to express vulnerability, or just maybe even some of the struggles with negative means of crying out?
Yeah, yeah. I'll give you two. There is a one that's I'll start with the funny one that's kind of funny.
Okay.
Uh I had a trip to DC as a kid, like a field trip, and I had seen the movie Finding Nemo probably 7 or 8 times. Never shed a tear in my life. I was like, ah, it's a cute movie, whatever. But
Mm.
for some reason, on this ninth viewing that we were watching on this bus, I just the tears came rolling down on that scene where Nemo is swimming around and looking for his dad and
Hmm.
lost. I'm a kid who grew up fatherless,
Yeah.
because my dad died when I was in kindergarten.
Mm.
So I don't know what was happening, but something in that moment with that scene triggered me to just start crying. And I was
Mm.
on this bus with all these people. And it was a scene because people were pointing. You're like, oh, Brandon's crying. And that was a moment. But
Mm.
there was a teacher, who was later a football coach of mine, who held me
Oh.
and was very comforting. And so that was a powerful moment. And also, I mean, it was Finding Nemo. So I'm like, wow, that really, for some
Hey,
reason,
Finding Nemo got me. I don't care what none of y'all say. I got my own abandonment issues. All right, Finding Nemo got me a couple times. So I ain't even gonna front.
yeah, yeah. And
Up.
then
No, Up. That movie Up. Ugh,
that's a good one too. All
Up
those
got
little
me.
those Pixar movies, man. Coco. If you
Baby,
haven't seen Coco,
I ain't even seen Coco. I don't know if I'm trying to do it to myself yet. Do I need to?
bro, I casually was gonna watch Coco, like, oh, I guess I'll check out this new movie, and bro, I wasn't ready. That, uh,
They be hitting you. You be like,
that's
ugly,
that
ugly
crow. You got to
crying.
inhale, like, yes, sir, yes,
And
sir.
so
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 that was
what's the yeah,
that was
what's
one of
the
the more funny ones, but the one
uh,
that I can remember really crying.
mm,
Uh, I loved my grandpa. He was my dog, and growing up without a father, you really draw close to the father figures in your life, like your
mhm,
uncle and your grandpa. And my mom was a young mom, so when she had me, she still had this. She was young, so she still wanted to go out and party and hang out with friends. So
mhm,
every weekend, I spent it with my grandpa. I was at my grandpa's house. He made pancakes. He would make, you know, the canola oil. Like, he's from the South. He had that really good stuff. He got the grits, all that. And eventually, as he got older, we moved in with him to take care of him.
Mm,
That meant leaving my big town in Ohio, Cincinnati, and moving to a smaller town where he lived in Richmond, Indiana, which I was very upset about, but in hindsight, very glad we did it. So my mom was sick, so she was, in bed, and my grandpa was sick too. But his sick was like really just like, and he was, obviously an older man at this time. Uh, but it was kind of on me. My sister was going somewhere. It was on me to kind of help him and take care of him. It got to a point where he just wasn't responsive
wow.
the way he usually was, right? And part of his face was drooping, and
Hmm.
so I was freaking out internally, right?
Yeah.
Hit my mom up like, "Yo, I don't know what's going on." She was dead asleep. She had taken something
Yeah.
that made her just like, so she really wasn't coherent. So I called my grandma and said, "Hey, grandma, I don't know what's going on with grandpa, but this has happened." She's like, "Okay, I need you to call 911. I'll be there in a sec."
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm what am I, sophomore in high school at this time? And I'm just remembering, my grandpa talking about how you're a man and you're a man of the family, all this type of stuff. So
Mm,
I'm not, I think the adrenaline of it all, like I wasn't really gonna cry or anything like that at that moment.
yeah.
Um, and my grandpa had like gotten up to go use the restroom, and he fell over,
Wow.
and I ran over, and he died in my arms right there.
Man.
And
Wow.
yeah, that was tough. And
Wow.
I was very much in that moment upset and obviously very sad. But I was just so focused on, you got to be the man of the family and handle this.
Wow.
Ambulance comes to help with all that. Right with my grandma. My mom, we try to get her to wake up, and she's getting a little more awake and stuff like that. And she's alarmed and all this type of stuff. And I went through that entire process without crying until the funeral, and
Mm,
it just all came out. And at that point, it didn't stop. Like it just felt like I was crying for hours.
yeah.
Um, and it was a mix of sadness. I also had a little bit of resentment towards my mom at that moment
Mm,
because I felt like it was something she should have been helping me with. I felt like I was kind of left hanging and alone in that moment.
yeah.
But also, hindsight once again, and where it really wasn't her fault, right? And that's part of what you unpack that over time. Um, but that moment in particular, and shedding all those tears, I don't remember anything about that day. I can't tell you what I ate, can't tell you where
Wow.
we were at. I just remember crying for hours on hours on hours, and
Wow.
um, and crying at school the next day. Had to go to school the next day. Cried my eyes out. So, that was like the first time I think I literally just let it all out in a sense, right?
Yeah.
But it was, it was freeing in a sense because I was holding in a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
I can't imagine what would have happened if I continued to bottle that up.
Even at that, yeah. I
You
mean,
know what
one,
I mean?
yeah, one, I want to say, just my condolences, and also, just thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that, man. I mean, that's a really heavy circumstance, and I'm really glad to hear actually that you were able to allow for that moment of kind of mourning and that moment of release, because you're right. I don't know how that could have or would have looked, if you weren't able to do that. And I can only imagine that's still pretty young, to have something
Mhm.
like that happen. So yeah, man, I thank you for sharing that. That took a lot of courage even to just speak to it the way that you did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you allowing me to do that. I mean, I don't talk about it a lot. It's not something that I share a lot, right? A lot
Yeah.
of these things, but it is therapeutic to talk about these things because when you bottle these things up, it it does wear on you over time. It's like if you were to continue to pack on layers and layers of clothes, eventually you're not going to be able
Hmm.
to move. You're not going to be able
Yeah.
to walk, right? So you got to unshed those layers. You got to take off those and get a new fresh pair on. So
Yeah.
that's thank you for letting me do that.
Yeah. That's also that's a great analogy. You might have just inspired a poem. I'm a CC you if you inspire
There
if I
you
end up
go, man.
writing something like that.
The
Well, I
emperor's
got
new clothes.
you know I got one more in closing for you, and I've actually asked you this one before, so it's not exactly a surprise, but just want to be mindful of the time here. What could the world use more of from men?
Hmm. I don't remember how I answered it last time.
Good.
You know what the world could use more of from men is empathy.
Mm,
I think empathy. I think that we as men have grown up in a system where we are not told to look out really for anyone but your own,
mm,
in a sense, right? Um, so anyone that is not part of your immediate family unit, you don't really care. And when I look at the issues that we face today, violence, crime, things like that, the issue isn't a lack of discipline or anything. It's a lack of heart. It's a lack of empathy, a lack of seeing the person across from you as another person, another human, and
yeah.
contextualizing your mind that they may have a kid or someone that cares about them and loves them,
Yeah.
or depends on them. And so I think the world could use more of that. I think even in conversations we have online, when we have these movements or our sisters are crying out through the Me Too movement and stuff like that. Um, and men can be very dismissive of that.
Yeah.
And I think we have to do a better job of listening. And listening is one of the keys to empathy. So I think that's what we could use more of as men: more empathy, more caring about each other, and more embracing of that. That empathy is a trait of strength. It's a great thing to be an empathetic person.
Yeah. No, I definitely appreciate that. And the flip of that question is, how does the world help men to get there?
Mm. The world helps men to get. Ooh, this is deep. Okay, well, let me just say this, and I've gotten in hot water on many platforms because people say that I am a apologist for criminals and an apologist for people that do bad things. I'm not an apologist, but I do believe that there is redemption. There's a redemption opportunity for everybody,
Yeah.
and I think the world in general is quick to offer redemption to people who are not black.
Mm,
But if you are a black man, it's, you know, there's no redemption angle. And there's plenty of examples of that through time. Black men can't make mistakes.
yeah.
White men can make all the mistakes and still get hired, employed, promoted. They can do something bad, then get picked up for a TV show the next. If you're a black man, you're done.
Yeah.
So, I think the world has to see us in the same light as they would anybody else. For men to be able to be empathetic and for men to be able to tap into that, the world has to have empathy for black men. It has to show that grace, that love, that redemption. And part of that is shown, not to get too political, but you show that through the laws you pass. You
Yeah.
show that through the way you legislate. You show that through the way you run a criminal justice system. You show that through the way you handle sentencing and punishments and things like that. Do you do restorative justice or do you just do law and order? You
Yeah.
know, those things matter. And we need more of the restorative, human first approach to encourage others, men in particular, to have that empathetic side. If you don't see empathy expressed to you,
Yeah. I
you're
totally
not going to show empathy to others.
Yeah, I appreciate how you put all of that, and I fully agree. I mean, I think there's so much. It's tricky when there's harm to want to extend empathy, and I think that is
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
regardless of who is on which side of what. It's a
Hmm.
difficult thing to do, But I can say from like meditation, mindfulness, other things, it has really paid off, even for circumstances that have internally harmed, to learn the process of extending empathy. And it really does change your entire perspective towards things. And to see that manifested in a more literal physical way within society, like I think that could be amazing, to see is what does the world look like when we start to take a bit of a step back and share empathy in whatever type of way and continue to encourage it, because you're right. I mean, a lot of in the, I feel like a lot of people, a lot of men in particular, even from having these conversations, feel forgotten about, don't feel like there's a lot of empathy extended, almost like what you said in your story, like full circle of like nobody even asked if I needed therapy, if I want to talk to somebody. Like I think that story happens a lot,
Yeah.
so I really appreciate you sharing everything that you have today. Please drop some like shameless plugs or something, anything you want the good folks at home to do, or where to follow you or things like that.
Yeah, you could find me at BPope TV on all social media platforms, BPOPE TV. Um, and I'm a person who's passionate about our people and what's best for our people and what's best for this country. And so ultimately, you're going to see that. If you follow me, you're going to see that I lead with love. I try to. I'm not perfect, but I try to lead with redemption, with love, with nuance, with context, um, and let that tell the story, right? So I appreciate you allowing me to kind of add some context to who I am and add some context to my life for anyone that may not know. And um, it's valuable. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. Appreciate that. And for all the any of the listeners at home, you want to get more involved, just hit up howmencry.com or find us on the interwebs, How Men Cry. You can find me at Dxtr Spits, Dexter minus the E's. And just thank you again, man, for just for taking the time, and look forward to continuing to build with you, man. I'm really glad that we've just connected, even in a more work front. But I definitely think that there's a lot of further conversations that we need to be having. So appreciate you so much, man, for your time and just for all of the vulnerability that you've expressed today. Really means a lot.
Anytime, man.
So, all right, you take care out there. Stay warm. It's a little bit warmer today, but take care out there. And thanks again, listeners, for tuning in.